Well, howdy there, stranger. I'm Jordy.
And I'm Brad.
And welcome back to Beers with Queers, the true crime podcast where I research a case and Brad here, and potentially you guys,
don't know a damn thing about it.
So first off, Happy New Year's, you guys. Hopefully you had a safe and wonderful time celebrating and ringing in 2025. I know we did, as always. Always have friends over, have a little celebration, and just start the year off right with good friends, good food, and good times. So it's a fresh start, so make those goals and stick to them. I know we already have with personal life and with the podcast. So hopefully 2025 is the year that we elevate the podcast even more, and I think we have a few fun and interesting things down the line for you guys.
We've been working hard on some surprises.
A few surprises here and there, and so thank you guys so much for giving us the opportunity to create surprises for you guys. So with that, let's make 2025 the best year yet, and let's get into our very first case of 2025. Now, sadly, this case is a sad and tragic one. I know all of the cases we cover are sad and tragic, but this one more so due to the fact that this case is the direct result of bigotry and hate. We cover a lot of different types of cases on this podcast, of course, all related to the queer community, but not always caused directly by the people we talk about being queer. You know, sometimes we cover cases where the victim or the perp just happens to be some flavor of queer, but that doesn't directly relate to what happened to them. And I think those cases are also important to tell because it does show that queer people are just like heterosexual people or any other group of people. There are bad people in every group, every walk of life, and also their sexuality isn't the only thing about them. But while we cover a lot of cases like that, we also cover a lot of cases where the victim being queer directly correlates to their tragic murder, and those types of cases are the main reason we started this podcast in the first place. You know, both of us are huge true crime fans. I wouldn't say fans, but enthusiasts, I guess is a better word. Like, fascinating, love reading about it and learning about all these forgotten people. And, you know, we consume a lot of true crime media. And in a lot of those, it's like, during my own research, I'd be like, oh, there's this case and this case and this insane case, and I can't believe no one's covered it yet, or this missing or murdered queer person, you know, why is no one talking about this? I feel like it would be such a bigger deal. And, of course, a sad reality of that is the fact that cases involving members of the queer community go way underreported and underinvestigated to this day, and so it's such a sad and tragic reality that so many people face. And so our way of helping get rid of that, I guess is the word, is, you know, our small little podcast and get those stories out there to as many people as possible.
To just bring attention to some of the stories that are lost out there. Because unfortunately, it's like Jordy said, in mainstream media, queer is still a hard thing to sell.
It's a very hard thing to sell, and so we're here to hopefully sell it to as many people as possible because those stories do deserve to be told.
And normally, if it's told on like a regular podcast, it's like a sensational fact. It's like, these people were gay.
And that also, too, you know, which, I mean, the coverage is still very important. It's still appreciated, I'm sure. But at the same time, it is nice to have a queer perspective on these types of cases because there are certain things that may happen like, oh, I don't understand why they didn't go to the police at this time, or I don't understand why they did this or this. And it's like, well, you know, speaking as a queer person, it's not as simple as that or this, or you have to look at the time that the crime occurred and how was police relationship with the queer community at that time, because a lot of the times it was just as dangerous to go to the police as it was to face a serial killer.
One of our friends actually took me out on the back porch here at the house and started crying and told me, listen to the podcast and everything, really brought up some things, which she has a queer brother. And she was like, hey, I've said some things to him that I regret now and everything. And this is like one of the best, most open-minded people I've ever met and everything. And she was like, I just want you to know, I'm listening to the podcast and I want you to know that you are supported and Jordy is supported and I support you. And I was like, I already know that. I mean, like, you're a wonderful person and everything.
And I mean, we've had some listeners in the past before, like mentioned, like our heterosexual or straight listeners are like, I love the podcast just because it's taught me so much about queer history and like I didn't know that. And so that is also another thing that makes me feel really proud and good of the podcast is that we are able to bring awareness, have open discussion, and just be like, this is from a different point of view. Not everyone experiences the same life or hardships. And so it's always nice to be able to just put that information out there for people to better understand each other.
And I mean, honestly, even being in the queer community, I have learned so much from doing this podcast. So, I mean, I'm grateful to be a part of it.
And so am I. Hopefully all of you guys are too, because I've learned so much. I feel like a little walking queer encyclopedia because I've learned so many like interesting and cool details about not just true crime cases, but forgotten queer history. Like we've covered a few pieces of just queer history in general that I'm like, I've never heard of this. I've never seen it brought up or mentioned. And so it's so fascinating because it feels like you're bringing life to that case again, just from remembering it. Because you know what they say, you only live as long as the last person who remembers you. And so let's just hopefully remember everyone. So with that, today we are talking about the tragic murders of Gary Matson and Winfield Mowder, a gay couple beloved in their community who would meet a horrific end at the hands of people that they thought were their friends, but turned out to be monsters who hated them simply due to the fact that they were gay. So let's just jump right into it.
I always hate the fake friend cases.
Yeah, for real. Like, just stop being their friend if you hate them that much. So it's the morning of July 1st, 1999 in Redding, California, and a man named Oscar Matson decided to call his son, 50-year-old Gary Matson. The two were extremely close and talked on the phone every day, so right away, Oscar knew something was wrong when Gary didn't pick up the phone. But while this was odd, and maybe Gary just wasn't awake yet, what Oscar heard next is what made him immediately realize that something was really wrong. And after no one answered the phone, the call went straight to voicemail, and Oscar got Gary's pre-recorded voice message. Except this time, it was different than what he had heard before. A new message was on the machine. It was still from Gary, but it was really weird, according to Oscar. In the message, Gary sounded, quote, disoriented or reluctant, as he stated that both he and his partner, Winfield Mowder, had become very ill and were going away to visit a friend in San Francisco and wouldn't be back for at least a week. Now, Gary sounded distressed, according to detectives who reviewed the voice message later on, and that he coughed several times, which they took as him attempting to alert anyone who listened to the message that something was wrong. Now, Gary and Winfield had gone over and had dinner with Oscar just the night before, and both were in good health and showed no signs of anything being wrong, so the fact that now, just a few hours later, they were saying they were extremely sick was very odd. Oscar listened to his son's message as his concern grew, and right before the message ended, a faint voice could be heard in the background, someone who had to be standing directly behind Gary. This unidentified second male voice could be heard whispering, quote, just calm down, to Gary before the message ended and the line went dead. Now totally freaked out, Oscar called up his other son, Gary's brother Roger, and asked him to drive out to Gary's home in an area known as Happy Valley to check on him. Now Roger agreed and arrived at his brother's home located on Oliver Street just after 1 p.m. Although Gary's station wagon was not in the driveway, Roger knocked for several minutes but received no answer. After checking the doors, he discovered that the front door was not locked and went inside to check things out. The entire house was deathly quiet as Roger called out his brother's name and the name of his partner, Winfield. Roger made his way to the couple's bedroom, and upon opening the door, he discovered a horrific sight. Lying on the bed were the nude bodies of Gary and Winfield. Both were lying in a pool of blood and very clearly deceased. Blood splatter covered the walls and even the ceiling of the room, as it was clear that this was a rage-filled attack. Something else that was also clear right away was how the couple had been killed. Dozens of shell casings belonging to a .22 caliber gun littered the floor of the bedroom, as it appeared that the couple were shot from multiple angles. Police were immediately called to the scene and began investigating the homicide and noticed a few interesting clues. First, there was no sign of forced entry, suggesting that the couple's killer or killers were let in voluntarily. On top of that, nothing of value was taken from the home, save for Gary and Winfield's wallets. But multiple other pieces of expensive jewelry and items were left completely untouched, suggesting that robbery wasn't the main motivation. Finally, investigators noted that the couple's unique bed was a platform bed, which actually sat almost 7 feet off the ground, meaning that in order for both to have been shot while in bed, their killers had to have been standing on something in order to do it. Gary and Winfield were taken in for autopsies, where the extent of their injuries were discovered. Both had been hit over the head and suffered from bruising and lacerations over their body, suggesting they had possibly been tortured or beaten before death. Gary suffered 5 gunshots to his head and 1 to his back, while Winfield had suffered 7 gunshot wounds to the head and 1 to his neck, meaning that whoever attacked them was aiming to kill. But probably the most gut-wrenching and heartbreaking detail from this case was both were found clutching onto one another when their bodies were found. Now, as investigators set out to hunt down the couple's killer, the brutal nature of the murders sent shockwaves through the relatively small community of Redding, California. No one could believe who would kill 2 members of the community who were well-known and kind to everyone, and the fact that they were still on the loose put everyone on edge. But before we continue on, let's back up and figure out how we got here and tell you a bit more about Gary Matson and Winfield Mowder. So like I said, it's going to be a pretty rough one today. Now, not much is known about the background of both men, but what we do know is this. Gary Moritz Matson was born on April 6, 1949, to Oscar and Stella Matson in Madera County, California. Throughout his entire life, Gary had a deep passion for all things outdoors and related to nature, specifically plants. He loved plants and was said to be happiest when studying and taking care of them. This led to him earning his Master of Science degree in Environmental Horticulture from UC Davis in 1984. Following this, Gary worked towards developing an arboretum in the Turtle Bay area, something he spent nearly a decade advocating for, before finally in 1991, thanks to his persistence, it finally became a reality. Following this, he became the Arboretum's first horticulturist before moving on to creating his own website in 1997 called plantstogo.com, which you can kind of guess what that means. It specializes in selling plants meant for hot climates. So Plants to Go. During all this time, Gary was described as being a teacher. When he wasn't giving dozens of lectures to local colleges, he was leading large groups of people through nature hikes and hosted class field trips to teach kids about the importance of plants. He was also said to be incredibly smart and knowledgeable in most areas, with a running joke in his family being that anytime someone encountered something they didn't know the answer to, they would immediately say, quote, "Gary would know." He was described as being incredibly sweet and loved making knowledge available to everyone. At some point, he would end up marrying a woman named Marcia Howe, and together the couple had a daughter named Clea. Their marriage wouldn't last, however, as eventually Gary came to terms with a part of himself that he had tried to suppress for years by that point. He was gay. The two would get divorced, but remained on good terms as they continued to co-parent their daughter together all the way up until Gary's murder. Now, sadly, despite trying for hours to find out any details, I was never able to discover exactly how Gary would end up meeting the love of his life, Winfield Mowder. What we do know is that the two had been together for 16 years by the time they were murdered, meaning they had to have met around 1983 or 1984. Now, Winfield Scott Mowder was born on May 30th, 1959 in Sacramento. Like Gary, Winfield also had a lifelong passion for nature, and specifically, plants. He graduated from Chicago State University with a Bachelor of Science in Anthropology and supported himself during this time by working in the gardening department of a hardware store. Like Gary, Winfield also enjoyed acting as a teacher to the younger generations and often gave lectures at local colleges. But instead of just talking about plants, Winfield was also a very big advocate for LGBT rights and often encouraged young people to not be afraid to explore who they are or to be themselves. Which you have to remember, late 80s, early 90s, yeah, being gay was starting to be more accepted, but it was still very uncommon for someone to put themselves out there so much to be like, I'm gay. I want other people to know that it's okay to be gay or to be queer, to express yourself, or just to experiment to see if you are queer. The couple moved into their forever home in Redding, California in the mid-1990s and right away made a name for themselves as the two worked to better their community. The two would be the founders of the Redding Farmers Market and the Carter House Natural Science Museum. Gary quickly made a name for himself as the go-to man for any and all garden-related questions. As it was said, people began to bring him leaves and stems, and he could instantly tell you what plant it belonged to and where you could find it growing in the area. It got to the point that when Gary would eventually be fired from one of his gardening jobs for attempting to start a union, a mass protest was formed by the community until they agreed to give him his job back.
That's pretty cool.
And that's how you know you're loved by a community, is they come together to be like, no, this is our go-to man. He knows what he's talking about. He's the best of the best. We're protesting on his behalf for you, demanding you give him his job back. That's how you know you're loved. Winfield was also the same, as he got a job at a local plant nursery and was known for his, quote, gentle nature, as anytime someone would come in looking to buy pesticides, he would always persuade them to consider a more natural and less harmful method. Both men were described as being incredibly kind and mainly kept to themselves outside of sharing their love for plants. Later residents of the town of Redding would later interviewed, and many stated that it was an open secret that the two were gay and in a relationship together, but that it was never an issue. The two never tried to hide the fact that they were gay and would gladly talk about it with people when asked outright. This led to the two also acting as role models for younger gay people who were afraid to come out. One young man named Troy Hawkins would describe how the two took him under their wings and just helped him navigate life after he came to terms with the fact that he was gay. They provided him with resources and information in regards to safe sex practices and warned him of the dangers of HIV/AIDS. The two lived on a small farm and even raised Gary's daughter Clea together, with her calling Winfield her stepdad. So, Gary and Winfield remain beloved and familiar faces in the community, making their shocking murders on July 1st, 1999, all the more tragic. And yeah, that sounds like ultimate couple goals, power couple. They're loved in their community. They're very active. They actively work to make it better and support it. They also just act as mentors for other young gay people, and they're also fathers.
I was going to say they're also fathers, so these people killed somebody's fathers.
For no reason other than the fact
that they were gay.
So, following the couple's murder, investigators hit the ground running, searching for any clues to track down their killer. For almost a week, few leads or clues emerged, leading some to believe that the crime may never get solved. But finally, a major break in the case would occur on July 7th, 1999, when Gary's credit card was used to make several large purchases.
Greed always gets you, and I'm glad it does.
Yeah, greed always gets you. And yeah, thankfully it does, because these criminals are idiots. And it's like,
You also use a credit card.
You use a dead man's credit card less than a week after he is found dead. So one neuron firing at all times. That day, Gary's stolen station wagon was also found abandoned along the side of the road before the trail of credit card purchases was traced miles away to a shopping mall located in Yuba County, California. There, officers surrounded a small Toyota hatchback right as two young men exited a nearby mailroom carrying several large boxes towards the car. Officers immediately pulled their guns and ordered the two men to get on the ground as both were placed under arrest. The two men attempted to act confused and unsure of what was going on, but a quick search of their car and their persons proved that they weren't very good at lying. Officers found that their car was filled with boxes of ammo, gun belts, and multiple firearms. The items purchased using Gary's stolen credit card totaled almost $3,000 worth of ammunition and guns that the two men were carrying to the car when they were arrested.
And this is 1997, so that actually buys a lot more ammunition and guns than it does now.
A whole lot more. Like, the entire car was nothing but ammunition and guns. So they were planning something terrifying. Both men were also carrying concealed guns, with one actually wearing a bulletproof vest, and Gary Matson's credit card and driver's license in a fanny pack. Both men went with police without much of a fuss, and it was soon discovered that the two were in fact brothers named Matthew and Tyler Williams. While both men were brought down to the station for questioning, little did they know that the brothers' criminal activities went far beyond robbery and even murder, as both were proud and vocal about their affiliation with white supremacist groups and their desire to cleanse the earth of anyone not straight and white. So, what do we know about these two literal monsters? The shocking thing is that before their arrests, we knew very little, and the two actually gave few indications of their true nature to most people that they knew. So again, we don't know the full details of the brothers' childhood, but we do know that according to everyone in their family and their friends growing up, absolutely nothing from their childhood could explain the sheer hatred they felt towards Jews and gay people later in life. Benjamin Matthew Williams was 31, and James Tyler Williams was 29, meaning both were born close together and grew up side by side. Both preferred to go by their middle names their entire lives, and like I said, there's no noticeable events from their childhoods or any sort of serious trauma anyone knew of or anyone could point to. Even the brothers themselves don't really give any indication. The Williams family was from upper middle class and lived in a very nice neighborhood in California for the entirety of the boys' childhoods. Neighbors described them as being very popular amongst their peers and at school and always had friends over. The two would often help the younger kids in the neighborhood with any problems like fixing bikes and teaching them about certain plants and insects. Both showed a deep fascination for collecting coins, and both were very into gardening, with many stating both had a natural talent in making anything grow. The family was always outside gardening and had multiple vegetables and fruits growing, along with chickens, goats, and ducks, with the family proudly stating they were, quote, self-sufficient and only ate what they raised or grew. The only noticeable thing that stood out to neighbors was the noises coming from the home at night. Religious music and recorded sermons could be heard blaring from within the Williams house at all hours of the day and night, with the boys being stated to be very deep into religion, and it was the only thing they valued above all else. Matthew would often walk up and down his street, quote, talking to God, with neighbors often seeing him talking upwards to the sky for hours on end. The boy's father was a retired forest ranger, and it would eventually come out that he was also a doomsday prepper and had raised the boys their entire lives to be able to live off the land in preparation for the upcoming apocalypse. Still, neither boy really showed any violent tendencies or hateful views during this time. As the two got older, they began to spend more and more time together, with Matthew being described as, quote, the alpha between the two, as Tyler would cling to his every word and was constantly trying to get his older brother's approval. Once they graduated high school, the two moved out to the area of Redding to begin college and find jobs. For a short time, Matthew actually served in the Navy before leaving and going back to school at the University of Idaho, and it's there he fell in with the Living Faith Fellowship. His religious fanaticism only grew before he eventually quit the church because he didn't see them as true Christians. And that's when you're starting to get a bit of an issue there when you go to a huge, very popular church and then they're not fanatical or Christian enough for you.
Also, one went to the Navy, they went to college, they were exposed to a lot of different people and everything like that. So it's not like they're these backwoods guys that's never been or seen gay people or Jewish people or people of color.
Yeah, and that's another confusing thing too. Is it's not like they were sheltered their entire life or anything like that. That they were exposed to everything. They went to college, Navy, all that. So they have met and interacted with all walks of life. So the fact that they would later on develop such hateful views was shocking to people that knew them growing up, because it's they were not taught that at home. And they were very religious and doomsday preppers and stuff like that. But no one could recall they were never told they had to kill all Jewish and gay people. So following Matthew leaving the Living Faith Fellowship, he fell into a deep depression as he searched for, quote, something. Those that knew Matthew at this point stated that he was always searching for something and that he had an obsession with, quote, becoming pure, something he tried to accomplish through multiple ways, ranging from religious cleansing to dietary cleansing at one point, to becoming obsessed with, quote, having the perfect bowel movement, something he also convinced Tyler to try as well. What that truly means, no one but them can know for certain. But friends would state that they would spend hours on the toilet trying to poop out all the sins and bad things of their body. So it also seems like maybe mental illness or a little bit maybe at work here.
Fanaticism for sure.
Definitely some form of fanaticism. Now, while all this is weird and bizarre, it wasn't really hurting anyone. So, yeah, that's weird, that's concerning, but they're still not talking about hurting anyone, or they're just weird. But it was also around this time that Matthew finished his search and seemed to find what he had been searching for in the form of white supremacy books and teachings that he came across on the internet, which is a huge, huge leap to go from a normal Christian church to being I want to get involved with white supremacy.
But also those groups are always looking for people who's looking for something and they just don't know what it is. Hey, maybe you need to hook up and be with us and just hate people. It's really easy.
Yeah, you're white. Perfect. Come on in. Although it was never able to be established the exact reason Matthew began to lean into white supremacy, one major theory was due to the fact that also around this time, he began to associate with members of the Christian identity movement. So, the Christian identity movement is considered an interpretation of Christianity where members believe race plays more of an important factor than faith. So, members of the movement believe that only people of Aryan and Nordic descent are considered, quote, God's chosen, and that everyone else is considered subhuman and will not be getting into the kingdom of heaven. So it is a hate group trying to masquerade as religion.
Yeah, I guess God made a mistake after he made white people and made all the other races. If that's what you believe, you're just saying God made a mistake. That seems a little weird to me.
It is always weird, the lengths racists will go to justify being racist. Now, the movement teaches and preaches for racial segregation and for interracial marriage to be banned, and that homosexuality should be punishable by death. The movement is in no way affiliated with any official branch of Christianity, who have denounced the movement as a hate group. The group is also a doomsday cult, as their leaders preach of an upcoming apocalypse brought on by minorities, and that in order to stop it, the world needs to be cleansed. Now, the Christian identity movement has its roots in racist ideologies dating back all the way to the 1920s, and throughout most of history, they honestly remained a very small but vocal hate group that most people just ignored. However, as the 90s rolled around, the group started seeing a startling increase in popularity as they spread all across America and were growing larger with each passing day. So a few factors are believed to have caused this, with one being the rise of the internet.
I was fixing to say, once the internet come out, you can get your hate speech all over the place.
Yeah, the first time millions of people all over the world are connected, can interact with each other, and share each other's beliefs. So now they're able to coordinate with large groups of people all over the world.
And plus, this is like 1997, so it was like, all the stuff where they talk about the dark web. The dark web's just the stuff that Google doesn't like just hand to you.
Yeah.
Back in those days, Google, well, there wasn't a Google, but like, you could just type in about anything into a search engine and
there it is on the front page.
Yeah, this is the wild, wild west.
And the other major factor for its potential rise in popularity was that as the 90s went on, many people around the world were terrified of one popular predicted event.
Is it the Mayan calendar?
No.
Or Y2K?
It's the legend of Y2K.
Oh my gosh. I would actually have wished it to be the Mayan calendar.
Yes. So, in part because of Y2K. So, actually, can you tell us a little bit about what Y2K was, Brad?
So, I believe Y2K was that everybody feared that when it reached the year 2000, that the system of the date and the time wouldn't be able to correctly switch over, and that it would basically erase all kinds of electronic data in banks and everything like that, thus sending the world into a frenzy as nobody could get to their money and stuff like that. I was too young to understand it then, and it literally fizzled out overnight. And so, I don't know that much about it other than it was a lot of worry for nothing.
That is literally it. Y2K was the belief that once the clock struck midnight on New Year's 1999 and we entered a new millennia, for some reason, they never really gave a reason, the world's technology would not be able to handle it, and the world would essentially collapse into chaos until it ended.
I swear, I think it had something to do with the date and the time not being able to go over, because they had not programmed it out of being able to be 1990 something. So when it went to 2000, it wasn't programmed to do that or something. I don't know.
It is really weird. It's also fascinating to read about it, which also, this sounds ridiculous now, but back then it was a legit fear for millions of people. I mean, President Clinton issued something about it. Even Best Buy had stickers on their electronics urging people to turn off everything electrical in preparation for Y2K. So it was a concern that people took seriously.
I remember that night I had a big sleepover and had a bunch of my friends over because I was like, if it's going to be the end of the world, I'm going to have my friends over.
And that's the best way to do it. I mean, what else are you going to do? The world's ending.
And then the next day we woke up and was like, wow.
The world didn't end. So, but at this point, it was still a very real fear for a lot of people. So now more than ever, people were afraid of a world-ending event fastly approaching, and the Christian identity movement used this to their advantage. Leaders began organizing lectures and traveling across the country, preaching about Y2K and the end times. In fact, one leader in the group, named John Trockman, actually held a lecture in Redding, California, in January before the murders. A lecture Matthew Williams is known to have attended. This caused large pockets of Christian identity members to form across the country, including in Redding, much to the concern of local law officials. It was also during this time that Matthew began to make his anti-gay views known. So one of Matthew's closest friends throughout school and into adulthood was a man named Dan Martin, and the two often would go on camping trips together, write poetry, and confide in one another, just about everything. But towards the beginning of 1999, Dan officially came out as gay to his friends and family, something pretty much all of them accepted. But upon hearing the news, Matthew is said to have begun hysterically crying and sobbing uncontrollably. Soon after, Matthew's friends began noticing that he started to openly talk about his disapproval of homosexuality to anyone who would listen, even when that wasn't the topic of conversation. He would often preach about how the Bible condemned homosexuality and that all gay people were going to hell. something they found odd since it never seemed to be an issue before, and at one point they believed that Matthew himself may be gay.
I was going to say, everybody always thinks that he's probably gay, but a lot of times when people go way off the deep end, it's a red flag that maybe something's up. Maybe they're fighting something internally that they don't want to deal with.
It's compensating for something. Now, a search of the brothers' homes after their arrest would also turn up dozens of pamphlets and books talking about white supremacy and a hatred for Jewish people and gay people. All this came as a complete surprise to most people that knew the brothers in Reading, as both operated their own landscaping business and were described as being incredibly warm, polite, and friendly. Although never officially confirmed, it's believed that this is how the brothers came into contact with Gary Matson and Winfield Mowder, as Winfield worked in the plant nursery where the brothers would often buy landscaping supplies, and the brothers were also known to frequent the farmers market, which Gary and Winfield helped run. The four are known to have interacted on several occasions, and all were described as being warm and friendly with no indication of hostility whatsoever. However, one odd occasion did stand out, as an older man would come forward later on and state that he actually decided not to hire the brothers for a landscaping job after a weird comment made by Matthew. The man asked Matt if he knew Gary Matson since they were in similar lines of work, and Matt responded with, quote, "Yeah, I know Matson. He's a homosexual." So it's like, that was just weird. We weren't talking about that. I don't know why you felt the need to bring it up. And like I said earlier, the fact that Gary and Winfield were gay was not much of a secret to anyone, nor did it really matter to anyone else, as both were pillars of the community. And, even in the 90s, they were like, these are just good people. I don't really care what they do behind closed doors. They're not hurting anyone. They're actually taking care of everyone. One friend would later even describe them as being the soul of Reading. Now, what series of events that led the Williams brothers to ultimately torture and murder a couple they seem to be cordial with is not known. What we do know is that just a few weeks before the murders, Matthew called up his former friend, Dan Martin, and when Dan stated that he was now living in LA and working in an HIV prevention center, Matthew burst into tears and began hysterically crying again, something Dan feels may have contributed to Matthew finally snapping. So this all kind of leads us back to where we left off, with Matthew and Tyler Williams being arrested and taken in for questioning after being caught using Gary's credit cards to purchase ammunition. Shell casings found at the scene of the murder matched guns found in the brothers' car, as well as fingerprints belonging to both brothers being found in the couple's home. The two were officially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, but even though they had the physical evidence to throw at the Williams brothers, they still didn't know the full story. What happened that caused them to so brutally murder an innocent couple, and why did they do it when they did it? Now, Matthew refused to speak to police and remained defiant throughout his interrogation, but Tyler, on the other hand, was a different story, with officers describing him as, quote, intelligent and oddly polite. During his interrogation, Tyler laid out his version of events for investigators. He stated the plan to murder Gary and Winfield first started forming about 2 weeks before the actual murders in mid-June 1999. It was around this time that Matthew began to, quote, take action and implement some of the teachings of the Christian identity movement, which involved targeting terroristic hate attacks on specific groups of minorities like homosexuals and Jews. At this point, Tyler inadvertently helped investigators actually solve another recent unsolved crime that they had been really puzzled about. So on the night of June 18th, 1999, in Sacramento, 3 Jewish synagogues were damaged and partially destroyed in a series of rapid fire bombings. The fire bombings caused over $1 million of damage and sent fear throughout the Sacramento Jewish community, with investigators left stumped as to who the perpetrators were. The trail had gone cold by the time the brothers were arrested, so this admission was a shock to investigators to learn that it was the brothers that did the fire bombings.
They were busy bees.
They were, invest some of that time into actually, bettering the community, like
the people you murdered.
Like the people you murdered. Tyler also revealed that he and his brother had created a hit list right after they destroyed the synagogues, in which they listed over 50 notable Jewish residents in the area that they planned to attack and potentially murder. It was on this night they carried out their attack that Tyler states Matthew first mentioned Gary and Winfield being their next victims. As the two were driving to their attack, Matthew turned to his brother and mentioned that he met Gary and Winfield at a farmer's market a few days prior, and that he was informed that the two were in a homosexual relationship, that they would be perfect for their next attack. What made his brother single them out specifically was unknown to Tyler.
Also, that person that told them that they were in a homosexual relationship, sometimes when you say that stuff to the wrong people, stuff like this happens.
But also, to be fair, there are accounts of all four interacting before this, so we'll learn that even Tyler's not the most reliable narrator, so it's hit or... And also, Matthew had mentioned months prior that he knew the two were gay because he mentioned to an old man. So it's... People aren't sure how true this story is, and it's really murky and muddy, or if it's just Tyler trying to cover for his brother. So it's like it's less premeditated than actually it's already premeditated. But
2 weeks before they were planning to kill him, so that's pretty premeditated to me.
But these people also got caught because they were using a man they murdered's credit card to buy $3,000 worth of ammunition less than a week after they murdered him. So, we're not working with a full deck here.
But I am going to leave what I say stand.
Oh, yeah.
You don't always have to lead with, oh, that's a gay person. When you introduce someone, I've been introduced as my gay friend, I don't know how many times, and I'm like, hello, I also have a name. It's Brad.
It's gay friend number one. That's what you'd be listed in as the credits to a Ryan Murphy show. So Tyler states that in the early morning hours of June 30th and into July 1st, he and Matthew borrowed a Toyota rented by their father, Benjamin, and drove it to the home of Gary and Winfield. How they knew where to go is also a mystery. So also, like I said, there's more to this story that they're leaving out, and the fact that there was no forced entry shows that they had to have been let into the house. So it goes to show you that they are downplaying how well they actually knew Gary and Winfield, partially because they're like, I don't want to be associated with the gay couple because then people will think I'm gay. The two supposedly found the front door unlocked and snuck inside where they discovered the couple asleep in their elevated bed.
I will say, this elevated bed in my mind has everything amiss. Like 7 feet tall up in the air.
I don't understand it either, and I tried to find photos, but I couldn't find it. But
I'm like, how tall is the ceiling? Is it like an extra tall ceiling, or are they like right up on the ceiling?
Every report, everything I found on this case specifically mentions the elevated bed because it is so weird and unique, and the fact that they were shot in bed shows you that it had to be a really awkward angle. I wish I had a diagram to see for myself because when they were like, it's 7 feet off the ground, it's an elevated bed, I'm like, that doesn't seem safe, but also that just doesn't seem feasible.
Yeah, I didn't want to go into the elevated bed earlier when you mentioned it because it was very you were telling a lot of information and everything like that. But I always try to picture things in my head, and that elevated bed just...
I still can't picture it really either because I'm like, how is there a ladder that they climb into? I don't know. It's really weird. If someone knows what they're talking about here, I would love for you to send me a photo of it.
And again, also, if they were shot in bed, those guys had to climb up on something, or again, I'm like, how tall is the ceiling? Was it right up next to the ceiling and they just raised the guns up over their head and shot into the bed? Or
so that part, Matthew went and grabbed a chair from the kitchen, according to Tyler, which he used to stand on, and immediately began firing at the sleeping couple. So his version of events, Matthew was standing on a chair to reach the couple to be able to shoot down at them.
I don't know that either because they were holding each other. It sounds like they knew they were going to die before it happened.
And we'll touch on that here in a minute because there's also another piece of evidence that completely throws this part of the confession out the window. So Gary was struck 6 times and Winfield 7. Tyler stated that the two never woke up, but did begin making labored breathing noises after being shot, something that he says deeply disturbed him because he expected their deaths to be instantaneous and he didn't want them to suffer. Matthew proceeded to raid the house looking for money before he stole Gary's car, and Tyler drove their father's car. Now, along the way to their final destination to pick up the ammo they purchased with Gary's stolen car, they also set fire to several cars belonging to people they believed were either gay or Jewish. Tyler also stated he felt no remorse for killing the couple and that he didn't even see it as murder, but instead saw it as, quote, an act of judgment. Although investigators believe most of what he stated was true, they didn't believe it was the full truth, as it still didn't explain the weird voice message Gary had recorded and the one that they still believed he was forced to make under duress.
Yeah, I actually forgot about the voice message. So, yeah.
There's physical evidence to show that they were awake.
Yeah, they definitely knew they were going to die up in that bed, and that's why they were holding each other, which is really sad.
Horrifically sad. Now, neither Tyler nor Matthew would elaborate on this detail any further, but investigators very much believe that Gary and Winfield were not asleep the entire time and were fully conscious and aware of what was happening, which makes it even worse. Like, honestly, it's horrible to say, but it's like, it would have been better if they did die in their sleep and didn't wake up, feel afraid or pain, but they were fully aware. They were terrified, scared. They knew what was coming, so that just makes it even worse. Why they were forced to get back into the bed before being shot may have also been the brothers' attempt to make this version of the story more credible, because to record the message, they would have had to have gotten out of bed, record it, then forced back into bed to be shot. So it's like, that's a lot of work, which is probably this is a pre-rehearsed story for Tyler's part, where it's like, oh, well, they never woke up, so that kind of makes it less worse than the fact that we forced them to do all this to, like, give us an alibi, like they were going away for a week so people wouldn't question it, which even adds even more to the premeditation. The brothers were formally charged with 2 counts of murder and robbery, and on top of now also being charged with 3 counts of arson for their involvement in the synagogue attacks. In September of 2001, the 2 pleaded guilty to the arson charges and were sentenced to 30 years in prison, but that still left the murder charges, something not everyone would live to see. So although Tyler was described as a fairly model prisoner in the years following his arrest, Matthew was a different story. On June 22, 2002, he, along with another inmate named Paul Smith, attacked a correctional officer with a homemade hatchet, which resulted in him receiving severe skull fractures. Following this, Matthew was moved to his own private and isolated cell. On November 17, 2002, at just after 6:30 in the morning, Matthew Williams was found dead in his cell from an apparent suicide. At some point during the night, he used cardboard to cover his cell window to prevent guards from seeing inside, and then proceeded to slash away at the veins in his arms, legs, and neck with a razor blade he managed to retrieve from a prison-issued shaver, and he slowly bled to death. His sentencing for the murders of Gary and Winfield were to be held just a few weeks later on December 2nd. After his suicide, his brother's attorney received a fully signed confession in the mail from Matthew, taking full responsibility for, quote, killing the 2 perverts, and proclaiming Tyler's innocence. Tyler Williams would go to trial on March 3, 2003, and in order to avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to an additional 30 years in prison. Now, while there, he took the stand, and he felt the need to, quote, apologize to Gary and Winfield's families, stating, I have repented to the Lamb of God for attempting to take his place of leadership in dealing with the world's evils, instead of patiently waiting for his timing. That was his apology for gunning down 2 innocent people. Now, Tyler remains in jail to this day, with his first possibility of parole being in 2029. However, thankfully, it's very unlikely he will ever see the light of day again. Now, the legacy of Gary Matson and Winfield Mowder and all the good they did in life and for their community was forever immortalized in the town of Reading, with a community garden being opened in their name. A garden that continues to grow and be a beacon of love and hope for everyone to this very day. And that is the sad story of the murders of Gary and Winfield, the senseless murders, and just also the hate-filled lives of 2 brothers. I think this case is also really a scary reality to show you that you don't have to have a troubled childhood or come from a rough background to fall into these extremist groups. They go after everyone. It can be upper middle class, all walks of life can be involved with hate groups and hate speech.
Yeah, everybody around them were like, oh, they were really nice guys.
And then behind closed doors, they're like very into hate any minorities. Not only were they like preaching it and saying they hated minorities, they took it a step further and were like, we're also going to commit hate crimes and terrorist attacks against these minority groups, which is even scary because on the outside, again, which is another point because a lot of times racists and extremists like this do look and act like normal people. They can be the school teacher down the street. They can be the nice old lady or old man. And when you interact with them, they're very sweet and loving. And then behind closed doors, it's like Jekyll and Hyde. So that's something to be very aware of and very cautious of. You never know with people their true intentions. And with that, thank you guys again so much for tuning in for another episode, our first episode of 2025. If you enjoyed this episode or the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating or review on iTunes or Spotify. Helps us out a lot, helps other people discover the podcast. And of course, we just love hearing from you guys. If you want to see photos from today's case, you can follow us on Instagram at beerswithqueerspod, that's P-O-D, or on Facebook at Beers with Queers, a true crime podcast. And until next week, stay dangerous out there, my friends, and happy 2025.
See you soon.